down to his last $800 and facing eviction with his 9-year-old daughter. Former high school science teacher Marcus Riley made a reluctant decision to move into his late grandfather's dilapidated farmhouse that nobody in the family wanted. What he discovered hidden beneath the crumbling property would not only change their lives forever, but would uncover a Depression-era fortune that had been waiting nearly a century to be revealed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Riley stared at his bank account balance on his phone. The harsh blue light illuminated his exhausted face in the darkness of his parked sedan. Just 2 years ago, he had been a respected high school science teacher with a comfortable apartment, decent savings, and enough stability to provide his daughter Emma with the childhood he'd always promised her mother before cancer took her away. Now at 37, he was living paycheck to paycheck, counting every single dollar with meticulous care. The school district cuts had been ruthless and systematic. With STEM programs consolidated across the county and his position deemed redundant, Marcus found himself among the first wave of layoffs. He'd believed his 8 years of excellent evaluations and his students' consistently high test scores would protect him, but budgets had no room for sentiment. When the principal delivered the news with rehearsed regret, Marcus had maintained his dignity, nodding calmly as if discussing someone else's misfortune. The private sector is always looking for people with your technical skills, the principal had offered weakly, avoiding eye contact. Maybe one of those research firms downtown could use someone with your background. But the private sector wasn't interested in a teacher whose expertise was making complex scientific concepts accessible to teenagers. The research positions all required specialized PhDs or industry experience he didn't have. Within 6 months, Marcus had cycled through substitute teaching, tutoring, and retail work, none of which paid enough to cover both rent and childcare. His emergency savings had evaporated with terrifying speed, disappearing into medical bills from Emma's asthma flare-up, car repairs after a fender bender that wasn't his fault, and the ever-increasing rent on their small apartment. Now with an eviction notice on their door and only $800 to his name, Marcus was down to his final decision. As Emma slept curled in the back seat, her small backpack serving as a pillow, Marcus scrolled through his phone contacts, his finger hovering over his sister's name. Asking Jennifer for help would mean admitting complete failure. She had warned him about the instability of teaching when he'd left his engineering program in his final year of college to pursue education instead. Then another name in his contacts caught his eye: Harold Tanner, his grandfather's estate attorney. 3 months ago, when his grandfather had passed away at 93, Marcus had received a call about the farmhouse his grandfather had left behind. At the time, with his job search consuming every waking moment, he had declined to even look at the property. The lawyer had mentioned taxes owed, repairs needed, and complications with the deed-all problems Marcus couldn't handle then. But now, with nowhere else to turn, he pressed the call button. "Mr. Tanner? It's Marcus Riley. I was wondering if my grandfather's farmhouse is still available." The conversation was brief but promising. The house remained unclaimed, with the family reluctant to deal with its issues. The property taxes were 3 years overdue, totaling $750, but if Marcus paid them, the house could be his as stipulated in his grandfather's will. "I should warn you, Marcus," Tanner said before hanging up. "The place has been empty since your grandfather moved to assisted living 5 years ago. It's in rough shape." "Anything is better than where we are now," Marcus replied, glancing at his sleeping daughter in the rearview mirror. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The following morning, Marcus drove the 2 hours from the city to the small rural town of Millfield, where his grandfather's farmhouse stood. He had visited occasionally as a child, but hadn't been back since his early teens. His memories were of a modest but well-maintained home with a wraparound porch and fields of corn stretching beyond. The reality that greeted them was far different. The white paint had weathered to a sickly gray, and what had appeared in his memories as a charming porch was actually partially collapsed on one side. Several windows were broken or boarded up, and the roof had visible holes where shingles had blown away. "Is this it, Dad?" Emma asked as they pulled up the overgrown driveway, her voice small but trying to sound brave. Marcus swallowed hard, forcing down the panic that threatened to overwhelm him. "This is it, sweetheart. It needs some work, but it's going to be great once we fix it up. Like on those TV shows?" Emma's eyes brightened slightly. "Exactly," Marcus agreed, wishing he had even a fraction of the budget those renovation shows enjoyed. A real fixer-upper. After paying the back taxes at the county office and receiving the deed and keys, they approached the house cautiously. The front door hung crookedly on rusted hinges but opened with a protesting screech. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. Cobwebs stretched across corners, and the wooden floorboards creaked ominously beneath their feet. What furniture remained was draped in yellowed sheets, creating ghostly silhouettes in the dim light, filtering through dirty windows. The place smelled of abandonment and decay, a physical manifestation of how Marcus felt his life had become. "It smells old," Emma observed, wrinkling her nose but maintaining her brave face. "That's just dust and closed-up air," Marcus assured her, trying to ignore the underlying smell of mildew and possibly rodent intrusions. "Once we open some windows and clean a bit, it'll smell much better." They moved carefully through the first floor, taking inventory. A living room with a stone fireplace filled with old ashes. A dining room with built-in cabinets, their glass doors cloudy with grime. A kitchen with ancient appliances, a refrigerator from perhaps the 1970s. A stove with mechanical knobs, wooden cabinets hanging precariously from loose hinges. The small bathroom contained a clawfoot tub stained rust-red from dripping water, a toilet Marcus didn't dare inspect too closely, and a sink with handles but no faucet. The plumbing, at least in theory, existed, though whether it functioned was another question entirely. Upstairs they found 3 bedrooms. The master with an iron bed frame still in place, and 2 smaller rooms that might have once been children's bedrooms or perhaps guest rooms. One had faded wallpaper with a pattern of little sailboats. The other was painted a barely discernible pale yellow. "This one," Emma declared, standing in the yellow room. "I want this one. It's sunny like my name." Marcus nodded, grateful for her optimism when his own was flagging severely. "Good choice, Em. Southern exposure, it'll be warm in the winter." As they continued exploring, Marcus made mental calculations. With only $50 remaining after paying the property taxes, what could he possibly do first? They needed water, electricity, heat. The roof needed patching before the next rain. The porch was a safety hazard. The list seemed endless, impossible. Yet he had to start somewhere. This was their last chance, their only option. Somehow he would make it work. Back downstairs, Marcus noticed something he'd overlooked on their first pass, a door partially hidden behind the kitchen pantry. It appeared to lead to a basement or cellar. "What's down there?" Emma asked, noticing his attention. "Probably a basement," Marcus said. "Let's check it out. Might be useful storage space." The door was secured with a simple sliding bolt rather than a lock. Marcus slid it open, revealing a set of wooden stairs descending into darkness. The air that rose from below was cool, but not damp drier than he would have expected from a typical Midwestern basement. Using the flashlight on his phone, Marcus took a tentative step down. The stair held his weight without protest, as did the next. Unlike much of the house, the staircase seemed in remarkably good condition, the wood sturdy and well-maintained. "Stay close behind me," he told Emma, who followed eagerly, always ready for an adventure. As they descended, Marcus's flashlight beam revealed not the dirt floor or stone foundation he had expected, but a concrete floor and walls. The basement was surprisingly large and open, without the usual clutter of forgotten items one might expect in an old farmhouse. "It's so empty," Emma observed, her voice echoing slightly. Marcus nodded, sweeping his light across the space. Grandpa must have cleared it out before he moved to the nursing home. Then his light caught something unusual, a slight discoloration in the concrete floor near the far wall. Moving closer, he realized it was a seam, a perfect square about 3 feet on each side. "What's that, Dad?" Emma asked, pointing to the square. "I'm not sure," Marcus replied, kneeling to examine it. "It looks like some kind of trapdoor." There was a small indentation at one edge. Marcus pressed his fingers into it and pulled. Nothing happened. He tried again, applying more force. Suddenly, with a sound like suction breaking, the concrete square lifted, revealing it was much lighter than it appeared, not solid concrete, but a cleverly disguised cover. Beneath was a metal handle attached to what looked like a heavy wooden door set into the floor. Marcus exchanged a glance with Emma, whose eyes were wide with excitement. "A secret door, like in my books," she whispered. Marcus nodded, his own curiosity piqued despite his exhaustion. "Let's see where it leads." He grasped the metal handle and pulled. The door was heavy but well balanced, opening to reveal another set of steps leading even deeper beneath the house. These stairs were different, made of metal rather than wood, with a sturdy handrail. They looked newer, more modern than anything else they'd seen in the house. "Stay here while I check if it's safe," Marcus told Emma, who reluctantly remained at the top of the metal stairs while he descended. At the bottom, Marcus found himself in what could only be described as a bunker, a room approximately 15 by 20 feet with reinforced concrete walls, a ventilation system, and most surprisingly, electric lighting that still worked when he found and flipped a switch on the wall. The room contained metal shelving stocked with supplies, canned goods, water containers, first aid kits, and other essentials. A generator sat in one corner beside fuel canisters. A cot with neatly folded blankets occupied another corner. But it was what stood in the center of the room that truly captured Marcus's attention. There, on a heavy wooden table, sat 3 large metal strongboxes, each secured with a padlock. Beside them lay a leather-bound journal with his grandfather's name embossed on the cover, Jonathan Riley. "Dad, can I come down now?" Emma called from above. "Yes, it's safe," Marcus replied, his mind racing with questions. Why had his grandfather built an underground bunker? When had this happened? And what was in those locked boxes? As Emma joined him, Marcus picked up the journal and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was his grandfather's, neat and precise, just as Marcus remembered it from birthday cards and the occasional letter. The journal began with an entry dated September 1st, 1985. "I've completed the shelter as designed. The fear of nuclear war may have subsided in the public mind, but I've seen enough in my lifetime to know that preparation is never wasted. This will serve as both a shelter and a secure storage for the collection. May my children or grandchildren never need the shelter, but may they someday understand the value of what I've preserved here." Marcus flipped through more pages, each detailing additions to the shelter, maintenance performed, and cryptic references to the collection being augmented or assessed. The final entry was dated just weeks before his grandfather had moved to assisted living. 5 years ago. "My strength fails me, and I must leave this place. I cannot take the collection with me. It must remain secure until someone in the family shows the interest and determination to discover it. The taxes will eventually force a decision. Whoever pays them and claims this property will find what I've spent a lifetime gathering. May they use it wisely." Marcus looked up from the journal to the 3 locked boxes on the table. "He left something for us," he told Emma. "Something valuable." Like treasure? Emma asked, her eyes wide. Maybe, Marcus replied, examining one of the padlocks. Each had a combination dial rather than a keyhole. But we need the combinations. He returned to the journal, searching for clues. In the back pages, he found what appeared to be a series of riddles, each labeled Box 1, Box 2, and Box 3. The first riddle read, "The year she was born, the month we met, the day we wed." Marcus smiled. This one was easy. His grandmother's birth year was 1932. His grandparents had met in April 4, and they had married on the 18th. He tried the combination. The 18th of April 32. The padlock opened with a satisfying click. Inside the first box, carefully organized in protective sleeves, was a collection of rare coins, gold double eagles, Morgan silver dollars, and other numismatic treasures that Marcus, with his limited knowledge, could still recognize as extremely valuable. A note inside read, "My coin collection began with a single silver dollar given to me by my father during the Depression. He told me to hold on to real value when the world seems uncertain. I followed that advice for 70 years. The second riddle was more challenging. The number of stars when I was born. The steps to the porch, your father's birth month." Marcus thought carefully. His grandfather had been born in 1928, when there were 48 states and thus 48 stars on the American flag. The farmhouse porch had 7 steps. And Marcus's father had been born in November, the 11th month. He tried 48711. The second padlock opened. This box contained jewelry, his grandmother's pieces certainly, but also what appeared to be much older items. Victorian brooches, Art Deco rings set with diamonds, pocket watches from the early 1900s. Another note explained, "I began collecting these during the savings and loan crisis of the 1980s, when people were selling family heirlooms for cash. I couldn't save everyone's treasures, but I saved what I could." The final riddle was the most obscure, the atomic number of gold, the number of counties in our state, the year we thought the world might end. Marcus pondered this one. The atomic number of gold was 79. Their state had 92 counties. And the year they thought the world might end? That could be many years during the Cold War, but knowing his grandfather's age and history, Marcus guessed 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. He tried 799262. The final padlock opened. Inside the third box, Marcus found stacks of $100 bills, each bundle labeled with its value. A quick calculation suggested the total was over $100,000 in cash. But beneath the cash was something even more valuable: stock certificates for companies like IBM, Coca-Cola, and Johnson & Johnson, dating back to the 1950s and 1960s, along with treasury bonds and other financial instruments. A final note read, "The true wealth is here investments made when these companies were young, held through decades of growth. The cash is for immediate needs. The papers represent our family's future. Current estimated value, as of my last accounting, approximately $157 million. Use it wisely, teach the next generation the value of patience, and never sell in panic." Marcus sat heavily on the cot, the reality of what he was seeing overwhelming him. His grandfather, the quiet farmer he had known only as a kind but reserved man, had been secretly amassing a fortune throughout his life, a fortune now belonging to Marcus and Emma. "Dad, are you okay?" Emma asked, touching his arm. "Yes, sweetheart," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm better than okay. Grandpa left us something amazing, something that's going to change everything." He hugged Emma tightly, the weight of the last months, the job loss, the eviction, the desperation lifting from his shoulders. They still had a huge project ahead in renovating the farmhouse, but now they had the resources to do it properly. More importantly, they had security, a future, and a remarkable legacy from a man who had quietly built a fortune while living modestly on his farmland, preparing for a day when his family might need it most. That night, as Emma slept peacefully on the cot in the bunker, Marcus read more of his grandfather's journal by the light of a battery-powered lamp. The entries revealed a man of remarkable foresight and patience, who had lived through the Depression, World War II, and the economic ups and downs of the 20th century, always investing consistently, always thinking generations ahead. In one particularly poignant entry from 1978, his grandfather had written, "The true measure of a man is not what he accumulates for himself, but what he prepares for those who will come after. May whoever finds this treasure understand that its value lies not in immediate pleasure, but in the security and opportunities it can provide for our family's future." Marcus looked over at his sleeping daughter and made a silent promise to his grandfather. This unexpected fortune would not be squandered. It would be managed carefully, used to rebuild the farmhouse into a proper home, to provide Emma with education and opportunities, and eventually, to be passed on to the next generation with the same wisdom and foresight that Jonathan Riley had demonstrated. What had begun as a desperate last resort, moving into a dilapidated farmhouse with his last dollars, had transformed into an extraordinary new beginning. Sometimes, Marcus reflected, rock bottom wasn't the end of the story, but the foundation for something remarkable. His grandfather had understood this and had prepared accordingly, waiting patiently for the moment when his legacy would make the greatest difference. As dawn broke over the dilapidated farmhouse, Marcus woke to the sound of birdsong filtering through a broken window upstairs. For a moment he felt disoriented, the events of yesterday seeming almost dreamlike. Had he really discovered his grandfather's secret fortune hidden beneath the house? The weight of the journal in his hands confirmed it wasn't a dream. Emma was already awake, exploring the bunker with childlike curiosity, examining the neatly organized supplies on the metal shelves. "Dad, look at all this stuff. Grandpa was really prepared, wasn't he?" she said, holding up a hand-cranked radio still in its original packaging. "He certainly was," Marcus agreed, stretching his stiff muscles. Sleeping on the bunker's cot had been far more comfortable than the car seats they'd endured for the past week, but he wasn't as young as he once was. "How did you sleep?" "Good. It's kind of cool down here, like camping in a secret base," Emma replied with the resilience only a 9-year-old could muster in their situation. "What are we going to do today?" Marcus considered the question as he ran his hand over the stock certificates he'd examined late into the night. The paper wealth represented in these documents was staggering. His grandfather had invested consistently through decades, through market crashes and booms, never selling, always acquiring more when prices were low. "First, we need to assess what we have and what we need," Marcus explained, slipping naturally into teacher mode. "Then we'll prioritize the most important repairs to make the house livable." "And we're rich now, right?" Emma asked with childlike directness. "So we can fix everything." Marcus smiled gently. "We have resources now, but we need to be smart about how we use them. Grandpa didn't build this fortune by spending recklessly." As they climbed the metal stairs back to the main basement, Marcus explained to Emma the importance of discretion. "We can't just tell everyone about what we found. We need to handle this carefully, legally, and wisely." Emma nodded solemnly. "It's our secret treasure. Like in pirate books." "Something like that," Marcus agreed, ruffling her hair. "But first, let's see if we can get some water running in this house." The water situation proved more manageable than expected. The farmhouse had its own well with an electric pump that, after some tinkering and cleaning, Marcus was able to restart. The pipes groaned and sputtered, but eventually delivered clear, cold water to the kitchen sink. It was their first victory in reclaiming the house. "Water!" Emma cheered when the first steady stream flowed. "Now we can wash stuff." "And ourselves," Marcus added with a laugh. suddenly aware of how long it had been since either of them had enjoyed a proper shower. The electricity presented a greater challenge. The house's wiring was outdated and potentially dangerous. While Marcus had enough basic knowledge to identify the problems, this was not something he could safely fix himself. They would need a professional electrician. "We'll have to be careful with what circuits we use until we can get the wiring updated," he explained to Emma as they examined the ancient fuse box in the utility room. "For now, we'll use the bunker's generator for essential power." By midday, they had cleaned one bedroom, the yellow room Emma had claimed, enough to make it temporarily habitable. They'd found relatively clean sheets in a hall closet and cleared away the cobwebs and dust. The window still needed repair, but the weather was mild enough that a temporary covering of plastic sheeting would suffice. While Emma organized her few belongings in her new room, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his grandfather's journal, studying the entries more carefully. Beyond the financial records and bunker maintenance notes were personal reflections that painted a more complete picture of Jonathan Riley. One entry from 1969 particularly moved Marcus. "Today I purchased 50 shares of IBM at what many consider an inflated price. My neighbors think I'm foolish to invest in computer companies when I could be expanding my acreage. They don't see what I see, a world where information will be more valuable than land. I'm not building this portfolio for myself, but for those who come after me, who will live in that world." His grandfather had been remarkably prescient, seeing technological and economic shifts decades before they fully manifested. What had appeared to be a simple farmer's life had concealed a mind of extraordinary foresight and patience. Another entry, from 1973, revealed more of his motivation. "Margaret asked today why we continue to live so modestly when our investments have done well. I reminded her that wealth displayed is wealth diminished. Our strength lies not in what we spend, but in what we preserve and grow for the future. The farmhouse doesn't need to be fancy to be a home, and our grandchildren will thank us for our restraint someday." Marcus looked around the kitchen, seeing it with new eyes. What had seemed like neglect now appeared as intentional simplicity. His grandfather had chosen to live modestly, not from necessity, but from principle, focusing on building wealth for future generations rather than displaying it during his lifetime. As afternoon approached, Marcus needed to make a trip into town for essential supplies. Using a small amount of the cash from the third strongbox, he and Emma drove the 5 miles to Millfield's modest downtown. The general store was a throwback to another era, with wooden floors that creaked underfoot and shelves stocked with a practical assortment of goods. The elderly shopkeeper looked up as they entered, eyes curious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Afternoon," he greeted them. "Don't believe I've seen you folks before." "I'm Marcus Riley, Jonathan Riley's grandson," Marcus explained, extending his hand. "This is my daughter Emma. We've just moved into my grandfather's place." The shopkeeper's expression shifted to one of surprise and then understanding. "Jonathan's place, you say? That old farmhouse has been sitting empty since he went to Sunny Acres. Didn't think anyone would take it on. Name's Frank Miller. Your grandfather and I went way back." As Emma wandered off to explore the store's offerings, Frank leaned across the counter. Jonathan was a good man, quiet, private, but always fair in his dealings. "How's the old place holding up?" "Needs work," Marcus admitted. "But we're taking it step by step." Frank nodded approvingly. "Smart approach. Too many folks these days want everything fixed overnight. Patience, that was something your grandfather understood better than most." While selecting essential supplies, cleaning materials, basic tools, non-perishable food items, Marcus carefully asked about local services they might need. "Know any good electricians in the area? The house wiring needs updating." "Jim Holloway's your man," Frank replied without hesitation. Third-generation electrician. His grandfather wired half the county back in the Ree days. Fair prices, honest work. I can give him a call if you'd like. Marcus accepted the offer gratefully. By the time they left the store, Frank had not only arranged for the electrician to visit the following day, but had also provided contact information for a local plumber, a handyman who specialized in roof repairs, and a teenager looking for summer work who could help clear the overgrown yard. "Folks around here look after their own," Frank explained as he helped load their purchases into Marcus's car. "Jonathan was respected in this community. His family will be too." On the drive back to the farmhouse, Emma clutched a bag of penny candy Frank had insisted on giving her on the house. "I like it here," she declared, sorting through colorful wrapped sweets. "People are nice." Marcus nodded, feeling a growing sense that their desperate move to the farmhouse might have been more than just financial salvation. It might have been a homecoming of sorts, a return to community values his own busy urban life had lacked. Back at the house, as evening approached, Marcus connected the bunker's generator to power a few essential circuits, providing them with light and the ability to charge their devices. The small victory felt enormous after months of uncertainty. As they prepared a simple dinner on the ancient stove pasta with jarred sauce, purchased from Frank's store, Emma looked around the kitchen with a thoughtful expression. "Dad, can I ask something?" she said, stirring the pasta carefully. "Of course, sweetheart. Was Grandpa rich all along? Even when he lived here like this?" The question revealed Emma's growing understanding of their situation, the contrast between the fortune beneath their feet and the modest home above. "On paper, yes," Marcus explained. "But I think Grandpa had a different definition of wealth than most people. From his journals, it seems he valued security and possibilities more than luxury or comfort." "Like how?" Emma pressed, always curious. Marcus considered his answer carefully. "Well, imagine you have two kids. One gets $1 and immediately buys candy, enjoys it for a moment, and it's gone. The other invests that dollar, waits patiently, and years later can buy 10 candies or something more important. Grandpa was like the second kid, but on a much bigger scale. He wasn't focused on what money could buy him today, but on what it could provide for his family's future." Emma nodded, absorbing the lesson. "So the money was like seeds he was planting?" "Exactly," Marcus smiled, impressed by her insight. "Seeds that took decades to grow into what we found. And now it's our responsibility to be good stewards of what he grew." After dinner, as Emma read by lamplight in her newly cleaned bedroom, Marcus returned to the bunker to further organize the financial documents. The task was both daunting and exhilarating, tracing his grandfather's investment strategy through decades of careful acquisition. The stock certificates represented holdings in dozens of major companies, many purchased when those businesses were in their infancy. IBM shares from the 1950s, McDonald's from the 1960s, Microsoft from the 1980s. Jonathan Riley had consistently identified innovative companies with long-term potential and then held those investments. Through market fluctuations that would have frightened less patient investors into selling. Beyond stocks were bonds, precious metal certificates, and real estate holdings documented in thick folders of legal papers. The total value, as his grandfather had noted, appeared to be approximately $157 million, a fortune amassed not through speculation or gambling, but through disciplined, patient investing over a lifetime. A leather portfolio labeled Instructions contained detailed guidance for managing the wealth, including contact information for attorneys and financial advisors who had helped structure the holdings. There was also a letter addressed simply, "To my heir." Marcus opened it with reverent hands. "If you are reading this, you have shown the initiative and determination to claim the farmhouse when others would not, qualities I value above all others. This fortune represents not my success, but my belief in our family's future. Wealth can be a burden as easily as a blessing. It can corrupt as readily as it can enhance. The true value of money lies not in what it can buy, but in the freedom it can provide, freedom from fear, freedom to pursue meaningful work, freedom to help others. I have structured these holdings to be difficult to liquidate quickly. This is intentional. Fast money tends to disappear just as rapidly. The attorneys listed in the accompanying documents can help you establish a proper trust to manage and grow these assets for generations to come. My advice is simple: live modestly. Invest consistently. Give generously but discreetly. And always remember that true wealth is measured not in dollars, but in purpose, character, and the legacy we leave behind. With faith in your judgment, Jonathan Riley, the letter brought tears to Marcus's eyes. He had known his grandfather as a kind but somewhat distant figure, a man of few words and simple habits. Now through these writings he was meeting the profound thinker, the patient strategist, the visionary who had quietly built security for descendants he would never meet. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity, not just to rebuild their own lives, but to honor his grandfather's philosophy by using these resources wisely. The next morning brought Jim Holloway, the electrician Frank had recommended. A barrel-chested man in his 50s with calloused hands and practical eyes, he assessed the house's electrical system with professional efficiency. "Not as bad as I expected," was his verdict after a thorough inspection. "The bones are good, but you'll need a complete rewiring to bring it up to code. Could do it in stages if budget is a concern." Marcus, mindful of maintaining the appearance of modest means, nodded thoughtfully. "Let's start with making it safe and functional. We can improve from there as funds allow." Jim seemed to appreciate this measured approach. Sensible. Too many folks want everything fancy right away, then can't afford to maintain it. "I'll draw up an estimate for the essential work, then we can talk about a timeline." As the electrician made notes, Marcus asked casually, "Did you ever work with my grandfather?" Jim chuckled. Everyone in the trades worked with Jonathan at some point. He kept this place maintained, but never upgraded anything unless absolutely necessary. Always paid promptly, always in cash. Old school. "That sounds like him," Marcus agreed. "Did people think it was strange? Him living so simply?" Jim considered this as he tested a wall socket. Some did, especially folks who moved here from the city. But most locals respected it. Around here, flashing money is considered poor taste. Jonathan fit right and kept his business to himself and judged no one else's. This aligned with what Marcus was learning from the journals. His grandfather had intentionally maintained a low profile, integrating into the community while keeping his financial affairs entirely private. It was a strategy that had served him well, allowing him to build wealth without attracting attention or changing how people treated him. By noon, they had an estimate for the electrical work and a promise that Jim could begin the following week. The cost was substantial but fair, and represented just a tiny fraction of the resources now at their disposal. As they ate lunch on the front porch steps, Emma watching a pair of cardinals in the overgrown yard, Marcus's phone rang. It was Harold Tanner, his grandfather's attorney. "Mr. Riley, I'm glad you called yesterday about taking possession of the property," Tanner began. "There are some additional matters regarding your grandfather's estate that we should discuss. Would you be available to meet at my office tomorrow?" "Of course," Marcus replied, curious about what additional matters might exist beyond what they'd already discovered. "Is there anything I should prepare?" "Just bring identification and any documentation you have regarding the property transfer," Tanner advised. "And perhaps allow a couple of hours for our meeting." Jonathan left quite detailed instructions. After ending the call, Marcus wondered what else his grandfather might have arranged. The fortune in the bunker seemed comprehensive, but Jonathan Riley had clearly been a man who left nothing to chance. That evening, as they sat in Emma's cleaned room playing a board game found in a hall closet, a knock at the door startled them. Visitors were unexpected, especially as darkness fell. Opening the door cautiously, Marcus found a middle-aged woman holding a covered dish, a teenage boy standing awkwardly behind her. "Hello there. I'm Diane Mercer, your nearest neighbor, about a quarter-mile down the road," she introduced herself cheerfully. "Frank at the store mentioned Jonathan's grandson had moved in, so I thought I'd bring over a welcome casserole. This is my son, Tyler." The gesture was so unexpected and genuine that Marcus felt a lump in his throat as he invited them in, apologizing for the house's condition. "No need for apologies," Diane waved away his concerns. "We all know this place has been sitting empty. Tyler here is looking for summer work if you need help with clearing or repairs. He's good with his hands." The boy, perhaps 16, nodded. "I helped your grandfather sometimes with heavy lifting before he moved to the home. He taught me a lot about tools and fixing things." As they shared the casserole at the kitchen table, a delicious chicken and rice dish that was the first home-cooked meal Marcus and Emma had enjoyed in weeks, Diane shared stories about Jonathan Riley that painted him as a respected figure in the community. "Your grandfather was the person everyone turned to for advice, not that he gave it freely. You had to really ask. But when he did speak up, people listened. He had this way of seeing the big picture when everyone else was caught up in details." "Did you know he had a bunker?" Emma asked innocently, causing Marcus to tense. But Diane just laughed. "Oh, the famous fallout shelter. Half the houses built in the 50s and 60s around here have them. Cold War paranoia was real. Your grandfather's was supposed to be particularly well stocked. Is it still intact?" Marcus relaxed slightly. "It is very organized. Typical of him, I guess." "That was Jonathan," Diane agreed. "Always prepared for any possibility." As they were leaving, Diane added, "The community potluck is this Sunday at the town hall. You both should come meet your neighbors properly. Might help with finding good local resources for your renovations too." The invitation, so casually extended, represented something Marcus had missed in the city, a sense of belonging, of community looking out for its own. As they waved goodbye from the porch, Emma leaned against his side. "I like it here, Dad," she said simply. "Me too, Em," Marcus replied, surprising himself with how true it felt. "Me too." Later, as Emma slept peacefully in her room, Marcus returned once more to the bunker, not to count their newfound wealth, but to continue reading his grandfather's journal. Beyond financial strategies and practical advice, he was discovering the philosophy that had guided Jonathan Riley's life principles of patience, integrity, simplicity, and foresight that had not only built a fortune, but had earned the respect of an entire community. In those pages, Marcus was finding not just financial security, but something equally valuable: wisdom about how to live meaningfully in a world obsessed with immediacy and appearance. His grandfather had understood that true wealth wasn't displayed in possessions, but preserved in principles passed from one generation to the next. Tomorrow would bring more challenges: meeting with the attorney, planning renovations, figuring out how to wisely manage their newfound resources. But for the first time in months, Marcus felt not just hope but purpose. The dilapidated farmhouse wasn't just a shelter. It was a legacy, a foundation upon which to build not just a home, but a philosophy of living that honored the past while securing the future. As he closed the journal for the night, Marcus felt a profound gratitude toward the grandfather he had known but was only now truly beginning to understand, a man who had planted seeds of prosperity decades before, patiently nurturing them not for his own benefit, but for the moment when his family would need them most. The morning of their meeting with attorney Harold Tanner dawned clear and bright. Marcus woke early, his mind already cycling through questions about the additional matters the lawyer had mentioned. After making breakfast for Emma using the meager supplies they'd purchased from Frank's store, he explained their plans for the day. "We're going to meet Grandpa's lawyer in town," he told her as she finished her cereal. "He says there are some more things we need to know about Grandpa's estate." Emma looked up, curious. "More treasure?" Marcus smiled. I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe just paperwork. But it's important we understand everything Grandpa left behind. They dressed in their cleanest remaining clothes, a reminder that a shopping trip would soon be necessary, and drove the now familiar route into Millfield. Tanner's law office occupied the second floor of a well-maintained brick building on Main Street, above the town's only dentist. The attorney, a trim man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perched on his nose, welcomed them warmly. His office reflected his personality, organized, traditional, with leather-bound law books lining the walls and documents arranged in precise stacks on his desk. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Riley," he said, shaking Marcus's hand before smiling at Emma. "And this must be Emma. I have a granddaughter about your age." After offering Emma a small desk in the corner with colored pencils and paper, Tanner turned to business, his expression becoming more serious. "As I mentioned on the phone, there are aspects of your grandfather's estate beyond the farmhouse itself." Jonathan was methodical in his planning. He anticipated various scenarios and prepared accordingly. Tanner opened a thick file folder labeled Jonathan Riley Succession Plan and extracted several documents. "Your grandfather established a trust 20 years ago. The farmhouse property and its contents represent only a small portion of the assets involved. The primary holdings are financial in nature, investments accumulated over his lifetime." Marcus nodded, maintaining a neutral expression. Should he reveal what they discovered in the bunker? He decided to wait, letting the attorney continue. Jonathan left specific instructions that the existence of this trust was to be disclosed only to the family member who claimed the farmhouse and paid the back taxes, his test of both initiative and responsibility. "That's why you didn't mention this when he passed away," Marcus realized. Precisely. He was quite clear about the sequence of events. "Now that you've reclaimed the property, I can inform you that you are the sole beneficiary of the Jonathan Riley Family Trust, with your daughter as the secondary beneficiary." Tanner slid a document across the desk. It was a summary of the trust's holding: stocks, bonds, real estate investments, and various financial instruments. The total value listed at the bottom matched almost exactly the figure mentioned in his grandfather's note. $157,238,645. "Your grandfather was an exceptional investor," Tanner continued. "He began with modest savings from his farming income and military service, then systematically built this portfolio over 7 decades. Most impressively, he did so while living well below his means, maintaining the appearance of a modestly successful farmer." "Did anyone else know?" Marcus asked. "About the extent of his wealth?" "Only myself and his financial advisors," Tanner replied. Jonathan valued privacy in financial matters. He believed that wealth displayed invited complications, both external pressure and internal temptation. The attorney removed his glasses, his expression becoming more personal. "I knew your grandfather for over 30 years, Mr. Riley. He was a man of remarkable discipline and foresight. He saw opportunities others missed because he thought in decades rather than quarters." Tanner paused, studying Marcus carefully. "He also spoke of you often. He was disappointed when you didn't pursue engineering as planned, but he respected your choice to teach. He said it showed character to choose meaning over money." This revelation touched Marcus deeply. He had always assumed his grandfather had sided with his parents in their disappointment over his career choice. "The trust is structured to provide both income and growth," Tanner continued, returning to business. "You'll have access to quarterly distributions while maintaining the principal." Jonathan was adamant that the core assets remain intact for at least 3 generations. As they discussed the technical details of the trust administration, Marcus found himself overwhelmed, not just by the magnitude of the inheritance, but by the careful thought his grandfather had put into its structure. Jonathan Riley hadn't just accumulated wealth. He had created a system designed to benefit his family for generations, while preventing the pitfalls that often accompanied sudden fortune. "There's one more thing," Tanner said, reaching into his desk drawer. He produced a sealed envelope with Marcus's name written in his grandfather's precise handwriting. "Jonathan asked that I give you this personally after explaining the trust." Marcus accepted the envelope, feeling its weight, not just physical but emotional. Another message from beyond, another piece of his grandfather's legacy. "Take your time," Tanner said kindly. "I'll check on my assistant about those copies we need." Left alone with Emma, who was contentedly drawing at the side desk, Marcus carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small key. The letter began without preamble, in his grandfather's direct style. "Marcus, if you're reading this, you've shown the initiative I hoped for and have claimed the farmhouse. By now, Harold has explained the trust and its provisions. What he doesn't know about is the bunker beneath the basement. By now, you've likely discovered it and its contents. The financial documentation there is intentionally redundant, a backup system separate from the official trust. In uncertain times, it pays to have alternatives. The enclosed key opens the locked cabinet in my old bedroom closet. Inside you'll find my complete journals, 60 years of observations on markets, technology, and human nature. These are my real legacy to you, more valuable than the money itself. You were always different from your father and sister, more thoughtful, less concerned with appearances. That's why I structured things this way. The farmhouse wasn't just a test. It was a filter. Only someone who valued substance over show would see its potential. The money will provide security, but it's the choices you make with that security that matter. Remember, wealth is a tool, not a goal. Used wisely, it buys freedom from fear, freedom to pursue purpose, freedom to make a difference. Don't tell anyone about the full extent of the inheritance until you've had time to adjust to it yourself. Sudden money changes how others see you before you've had a chance to determine how you see yourself. Your grandmother used to say, "Luck is when preparation meets opportunity." I've provided the preparation. The opportunities are yours to discover. Grandpa Jonathan, P.S. Look after the apple orchard. The north row contains heritage varieties I've cultivated for decades. They're worth preserving. Marcus read the letter twice, absorbing its message and the unexpected personal connection it offered. His grandfather had seen him, truly seen him, in a way he hadn't realized. The inheritance wasn't random. It was a deliberate choice based on values Jonathan Riley had recognized in his grandson. When Tanner returned, Marcus had composed himself enough to discuss the practical next steps, setting up accounts. Meeting with financial advisors, establishing Emma's educational trust as specified in the documents. Your grandfather also left instructions about the farmhouse renovation, Tanner mentioned. He allocated specific funds for bringing the property back to its best condition, with modernization where appropriate. He was quite specific that the original character should be preserved. By the time they left the attorney's office 2 hours later, Marcus's head was spinning with information. They had appointments scheduled with financial advisors, architects specializing in historical renovations, and estate planning experts. The machinery Jonathan Riley had set in motion decades ago was now fully activated, designed to transform his grandson and great-granddaughter's lives while preserving the core principles he had valued. "That was boring," Emma declared as they walked back to the car. "Did we learn anything important?" Marcus smiled at her directness. "Yes, we did. We learned that Grandpa left us even more than we found in the bunker, and he left us a plan for how to use it wisely. So we are rich," Emma concluded. "We have resources," Marcus corrected gently, echoing his grandfather's philosophy. "And responsibility to match." Their next stop was the local bank, where Marcus needed to set up accounts for their immediate expenses. The bank manager, a woman named Sarah Chen, recognized the Riley name immediately. "Your grandfather was one of our most valued customers," she said. showing them to her office. Though you'd never know it from his modest transactions. As they established the necessary accounts, Marcus was careful to maintain the appearance of someone dealing with a significant, but not extraordinary inheritance. Jonathan's advice to keep the full extent of their wealth private seemed wise, allowing them time to adjust without the pressure of others' expectations or opportunism. By early afternoon, they were back at the farmhouse where the teenager from next door, Tyler, was already at work clearing brush from the overgrown front yard. Marcus had arranged this through Diane before they left that morning. "Found something cool," Tyler called as they pulled up. He pointed toward the side of the house where he'd uncovered a stone pathway buried under years of encroaching grass. "Looks like it leads around back to the orchard." The discovery felt symbolic, somehow connections to the past being revealed as they cleared away the neglect of years. Following the newly exposed path, Marcus and Emma walked around to the north side of the property where the apple orchard stood. Despite years without proper pruning, the trees had maintained their orderly rows. Some varieties were familiar, Red Delicious, McIntosh, Granny Smith, but others were unlike any apples Marcus had seen before. Checking the north row as his grandfather's letter had suggested, he found small metal tags attached to each tree, identifying heritage varieties with names like Esopus Spitzenberg, Cox's Orange Pippin, and Arkansas's Black. "These are special apples," Marcus explained to Emma, who was examining the tags curiously. "Some of these varieties might be rare or nearly extinct. Grandpa was preserving them. Like he preserved the money for us," Emma observed with unexpected insight. "He saved things he thought were important." "Exactly," Marcus agreed, impressed by her parallel. "And now it's our job to continue that work." As the afternoon progressed, more pieces of Jonathan Riley's legacy revealed themselves. In the bedroom closet, the key from Tanner's envelope opened a hidden panel, containing dozens of leather-bound journals, a chronicle of his grandfather's thoughts and observations spanning from post-World War II America to the early 2000s, sampling. Entries from different decades showed a mind consistently ahead of its time, recognizing the potential of computers in the 1950s, predicting the rise of global markets in the 1970s, identifying the significance of the early internet in the 1990s, but beyond financial insights were philosophical reflections on purpose, family, and living meaningfully in changing times. One entry from 1991 particularly resonated with Marcus. "Watched my grandson, Marcus, today during the family visit. While the adults talked real estate values and car models, he spent hours examining my collection of geology specimens, asking questions about how each was formed. He has the capacity to see value beyond the surface, a rare quality in this increasingly superficial age. He reminds me of myself at that age, curious about processes rather than products." The realization that his grandfather had seen and appreciated these qualities in him even as a child was profoundly moving. The distance Marcus had felt from Jonathan during his life now seemed more a result of his grandfather's reserved nature than any lack of connection or understanding. As evening approached, Marcus found Emma sitting on the front porch steps, watching Tyler finish his work for the day. The transformation was already noticeable, the yard's true dimensions emerging as years of overgrowth were cleared away. "Dad," she said as he joined her, "I think I understand something about Grandpa now." "What's that, Em?" She gestured at the partially cleared yard, the exposed stone pathway, the heritage apple trees visible beyond. "He was building something that took a long time to grow. And he didn't mind waiting, because he knew someday it would be ready when somebody needed it." The simplicity and accuracy of her observation struck Marcus deeply. "That's exactly right. And that somebody turned out to be us." That night, after Emma was asleep in her increasingly comfortable yellow room, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with one of his grandfather's journals, a notepad beside him. He had begun listing priorities for the farmhouse renovation, balancing immediate needs with long-term improvements. The electrician would start next week. The roof needed repair before the fall rains. The plumbing required updating, the porch rebuilding, windows replacing. Each project represented not just a restoration of the physical structure, but a recommitment to his grandfather's philosophy, investing in substance rather than show, building for longevity rather than impression. A knock at the door interrupted his planning. Opening it cautiously, visitors were unexpected. After dark, he found Sheriff Mercer, Diane's husband, standing on the porch in uniform. "Evening, Mr. Riley," the sheriff said politely. "Hope I'm not disturbing you too late. Thought I should stop by and introduce myself officially." Marcus invited him in, offering coffee from the thermos he'd brought from town. "Appreciate it," Sheriff Mercer said, settling at the kitchen table. "Just wanted to welcome you properly to Millfield. Diane mentioned you've moved in and are planning renovations." The conversation was friendly, but Marcus sensed an underlying purpose to the visit. After some general discussion about the community and local services, the sheriff's manner became more direct. "Your grandfather was well respected here," he said, turning his coffee cup slowly. "People appreciated his privacy, his consistency. Never flashed money around, never looked down on anyone. Always paid his debts promptly." "That matches what I'm learning about him," Marcus agreed. Sheriff Mercer nodded. "Thing about small towns, they notice changes. When someone suddenly comes into money or starts living beyond what seems reasonable for their circumstances, well, people talk." The observation was delivered casually, but Marcus understood the implicit advice. In Millfield, unusual prosperity, without clear explanation, would invite speculation, perhaps unwanted attention. "I appreciate the perspective," Marcus said carefully. "My plans for the farmhouse are modest, making it comfortable and structurally sound, preserving its character. Nothing extravagant." The sheriff seemed satisfied with this answer. "Glad to hear it. Too many folks come to places like Millfield wanting to build mansions that stick out like sore thumbs. Your grandfather understood something important about wealth. The less visible it is, the more useful it can be." After the sheriff left, Marcus reflected on the conversation. It reinforced Jonathan Riley's philosophy about privacy in financial matters. His grandfather had understood that wealth displayed created complications, changing how others perceived and treated you, potentially isolating you from community. By maintaining a modest, visible lifestyle while quietly building security, Jonathan had achieved something rare: respect based on character rather than possessions. Belonging based on relationships rather than status. It was a legacy worth preserving alongside the financial inheritance. The following Sunday, Marcus and Emma attended the community potluck at the town hall, bringing store-bought cookies, their limited cooking facilities not yet allowing for home preparation. The warmth of their reception surprised Marcus, who had grown accustomed to the anonymity of city life. People knew who they were, offered practical help with the renovation, shared stories about Jonathan Riley that painted a portrait of a man respected for his integrity, wisdom, and quiet generosity. Several elderly residents mentioned times when his grandfather had helped them through difficulties, always discreetly, always with dignity. "Jonathan loaned me the money to keep my farm during the drought of '88, confided an older man named Bill Patterson. "Didn't charge interest, just asked that I pay it forward someday. Never told anyone else about it. That was his way." Similar stories emerged throughout the evening of quiet assistance during medical crises, of anonymous donations to the volunteer fire department, of college scholarships provided through the local church with the donor unnamed but universally understood. Marcus began to see that his grandfather's wealth had indeed been a tool, not for personal luxury, but for strengthening the community he valued while maintaining the relationships he cherished. He had found a balance few wealthy individuals Achieved using resources for good without allowing those resources to define him or distort his connections. As they drove home that evening, the farmhouse silhouetted against the sunset, Emma voiced the revelation Marcus was also processing. Grandpa was like a secret superhero, wasn't he? Helping people without them knowing who did it. The childish comparison held profound truth. I think you're right. He understood something important. Sometimes the most powerful things we do are the ones nobody sees. Later that night, reviewing more of his grandfather's journals, Marcus found an entry that seemed to speak directly to their current situation. True wealth has little to do with bank accounts. It's measured in purpose fulfilled, in freedom to choose meaningful work, in ability to help others without expectation of return. Money is merely potential energy, neither good nor bad, until converted to action. The wise steward asks not, "What can this buy me?" but rather, "What can this make possible?" The answer to that question defines whether wealth becomes a burden or a blessing. As Marcus closed the journal, he felt a deepening connection to the grandfather he had known only superficially in life, but was coming to understand profoundly in legacy. The inheritance wasn't just financial, it was philosophical. A way of seeing money as a means rather than an end, a responsibility rather than a privilege. Outside, a gentle summer rain began to fall, pattering against the roof that would soon be repaired. The house that had initially seemed a desperate last resort was revealing itself as a perfect embodiment of Jonathan Riley's philosophy, unpretentious on the outside but solid in foundation. Modest in appearance but rich in possibility. Tomorrow would bring contractors to assess the renovation needs, financial advisors to help structure the trust distributions, decisions about Emma's education and their future plans. But tonight, in the quiet of the farmhouse that had sheltered generations of Rileys, Marcus felt a peace he hadn't experienced since losing his teaching position. His grandfather's greatest gift hadn't been the money itself, but the wisdom to use it well, to understand that true security came not from what you possessed, but from what you valued. Not from what others saw, but from what you built that would outlast you. As the rain continued its gentle rhythm, Marcus made a silent promise to honor that legacy, to use the unexpected fortune not to escape life's challenges, but to meet them with greater purpose. To provide not just financial security for Emma, but the more valuable inheritance of perspective, patience, and principles that had made Jonathan Riley wealthy in the ways that truly mattered. 6 months passed, transforming both the farmhouse and its occupants. What had begun as a desperate last resort had become a thoughtful restoration project, not just of the physical structure, but of family legacy and community connection. As autumn painted the countryside in amber and crimson, the farmhouse stood renewed, its weathered exterior now freshly painted white. Its structural issues addressed with care that balanced modernization with historical integrity. Marcus stood on the rebuilt porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the morning mist lift from the heritage apple orchard. The renovation had progressed methodically, prioritizing essentials first: electrical rewiring to eliminate safety hazards, roof repairs to prevent water damage, plumbing updates to provide reliable hot water. Only after these fundamentals were secured did they move to improvements that enhanced comfort and aesthetics. The process reflected Jonathan Riley's philosophy: build on solid foundations, focus on substance before appearance, invest for longevity rather than impression. Each decision required balancing modern convenience with historical character, creating a home that honored the past while serving present needs. Most importantly, they had maintained what the locals called the Riley way, modest visible, improvements that didn't announce their financial capacity. The farmhouse looked well cared for, but not ostentatious, the kind of home that belonged in the landscape rather than dominating it. "Dad, come see what I found." Emma's voice called from inside, interrupting his reflections. Following her excited summons, Marcus found his daughter in what they discovered was his Grandfather's study, a small room off the living room that had initially seemed unremarkable until they'd removed the dated wood paneling to reveal built-in bookshelves behind. Emma stood beside his grandfather's restored desk, holding what appeared to be a small leather-bound book different from the journals they'd found earlier. It was hidden in this secret compartment, she explained, demonstrating how a seemingly solid piece of the desk's interior slid aside to reveal a narrow space. I was just trying to organize the desk drawers like you asked, and I accidentally pressed something that made it open. The book, when Marcus examined it, proved to be a different kind of journal, more personal than the investment records or market observations they'd found previously. This was Jonathan Riley's private diary, containing reflections on family, purpose, and the principles that had guided his life. The first entry, dated 1946, shortly after his return from World War II, set the tone. Saw too many men die in Europe to waste whatever time I have left. Decided today on 3 principles to guide my life. 1. Build something that outlasts you. 2. Help others without seeking credit. 3. Judge success by the seeds you plant, not the harvest you reap. Most may call this foolish idealism in a world obsessed with immediate returns, but I've seen where short-term thinking leads. As Marcus flipped carefully through the aged pages, a narrative emerged of a man whose experiences in war had crystallized a determination to create meaning through purposeful living, a meaning expressed not through words or declarations, but through consistent actions over decades. What does it say? Emma asked, peering at the faded handwriting. It's Grandpa's thoughts about what makes a good life, Marcus explained, simplifying for her understanding. He believed in building things that last, helping people quietly, and measuring success by what you create for the future, not just what you get today. Like the apple trees, Emma observed, and the money he saved for us. Exactly. Everything Grandpa did had 2 timelines, what it accomplished now, and what it would mean later. This dual perspective had transformed Marcus's approach to their inheritance. Rather than seeing it as a windfall to be enjoyed, he now viewed it as a responsibility to be managed, a resource whose true purpose extended far beyond their immediate comfort. Working with the financial advisors Jonathan had selected, Marcus had maintained the core investment strategy while establishing structures that would serve multiple goals: Emma's education, community support, and long-term family security. Following his grandfather's example, these initiatives remained largely anonymous, effectiveness prioritized over recognition. The local elementary school had mysteriously received funding for a new science laboratory. The volunteer fire department found its equipment updated through an anonymous donation. Several promising students discovered their college applications included unexpected scholarships. All continued Jonathan Riley's pattern of quiet assistance that preserved the dignity of recipients while strengthening the community as a whole. Most significantly, Marcus had made a decision about his own future. After months of reflection and studying his grandfather's journals, he had enrolled in a teacher certification renewal program at the state university an hour away. By the next fall, he would return to the classroom not from financial necessity, but from conviction about where his talents and purpose aligned. Want to help me harvest apples this afternoon? Marcus asked Emma, carefully returning the diary to its hiding place. The heritage varieties are ready, and I've invited some of the neighbors to learn about grafting. Grandpa would have wanted us to share these rare varieties. The apple orchard had become their most public project, not because it represented financial value, but because it embodied Jonathan Riley's belief in preserving what was valuable, regardless of market demand. The heritage varieties, with their unique flavors and historical significance, had no commercial advantage over modern apples bred for appearance and shelf life. Their worth lay in their diversity, their connection to agricultural history, their resistance to diseases that threaten monoculture orchards. Can I show them how to make the special tags? Emma asked eagerly. She had taken particular interest in the metal identification tags her great-grandfather had created for each variety, learning to stamp the letters onto metal blanks with tools they'd found in the barn. "Absolutely," Marcus smiled. "You're becoming the expert." Later that afternoon, the Farmhouse yard hosted an impromptu community gathering. Diane and Tyler from next door, Frank from the general store, Jim the electrician who'd become a friend during the renovation, and several other neighbors had joined them for what Marcus called Heritage Apple Day, part harvest, part workshop on preserving these rare varieties through grafting and proper care. As Marcus demonstrated the techniques his grandfather had documented in his horticultural notebooks, he felt a profound sense of continuity. Jonathan Riley had preserved these trees not just for himself, but for future generations, maintaining living connections to agricultural traditions that might otherwise disappear. Now Marcus was extending that chain, transferring knowledge and actual grafts of these rare varieties to others who would continue their cultivation. "Your grandfather would approve," Sheriff Mercer commented quietly as they watched the gathered neighbors examining the different apple varieties spread across tables on the porch, Emma proudly explaining the characteristics of each. "This is exactly how he shared his knowledge, practical, useful, no fuss." "I'm just following his example," Marcus acknowledged. "He understood something essential about legacy. It's not what you leave behind, but what continues growing after you're gone." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "That's the Riley philosophy. Jonathan never wanted recognition, just results. Most folks get that backward their whole lives." As the afternoon progressed into early evening, the gathering evolved naturally into a potluck dinner on the porch, neighbors contributing dishes to complement the apple-themed cider, pies, roast pork with apple glaze. The conversations flowed easily, a community reconnecting with a family that had been part of its fabric for generations. When the last guest had departed, Marcus and Emma sat on the porch steps watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk, the day's satisfaction settling around them like a comfortable blanket. "Dad," Emma said after a comfortable silence, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that, sweetheart?" "If Grandpa had just given his money away all at once, it wouldn't have helped as many people, would it?" The question revealed an emerging understanding that impressed Marcus. "That's insightful, Em. Why do you think that?" She considered carefully before answering. "Because money gets used up, but the way he did it, growing it slowly and using just some to help people, means it can keep helping forever. Like how we're not eating all the apples, but saving seeds and making grafts so there will always be more trees." "That's exactly right," Marcus affirmed, amazed at how clearly she had grasped the principle. Grandpa understood the difference between consumption and cultivation. Most people consume what they have, use it up for immediate benefit. But cultivation means using resources in ways that create more resources over time. Emma nodded, absorbing the concept. "So the money is like the apple trees. If you take care of it right, it keeps producing fruit every year that you can share without cutting down the tree." "That's a perfect analogy," Marcus smiled, putting his arm around her shoulders. "And that's why we're being careful with our inheritance, not just so we have enough, but so it can keep producing benefits for others long after we're gone." That night, after Emma was asleep, Marcus returned to the bunker beneath the house. Though they no longer needed it for shelter, he maintained it as his grandfather had, a secure repository for important documents and a physical reminder of Jonathan Riley's preparedness philosophy. Sitting at the metal desk where he had first discovered the extent of their inheritance, Marcus opened his laptop and continued a project he'd been working on for months, digitizing his grandfather's investment journals and agricultural notes. The wisdom contained in those handwritten pages deserved preservation beyond the physical books themselves. As he carefully photographed and transcribed another volume, Marcus reflected on how completely his perspective had transformed in the 6 months since they'd arrived at the farmhouse. What had begun as a desperate measure, a last resort shelter when all other options had failed, had become the foundation for a purposeful future neither he nor Emma could have imagined. The inheritance had provided security, certainly, but its greater gift had been perspective, a philosophy of wealth as responsibility rather than privilege, of success measured by contribution rather than consumption, of legacy defined by what continues growing rather than what is merely preserved. A notification on his phone reminded Marcus of tomorrow's appointment, the final paperwork for establishing the Jonathan Riley Foundation, a philanthropic entity that would formalize and expand his grandfather's pattern of community support. The foundation would focus on 3 areas: educational opportunities for rural students, preservation of agricultural heritage, and support for small-town infrastructure, all continuing Jonathan's commitment to strengthening the communities he valued. Crucially, Marcus had structured the foundation to operate with the same quiet effectiveness his grandfather had practiced, personally evaluating needs systematically, providing assistance respectfully, measuring outcomes rather than publicity. The Riley name would be present but not prominent, the focus remaining on results rather than recognition. As winter approached, Marcus found himself increasingly drawn to his grandfather's early journals, particularly those written shortly after his return from World War II. Something about that transitional period, a young man determining his life's direction after experiencing global conflict, resonated with Marcus's own journey from career disappointment to newfound purpose. One entry particularly stood out. Realize today why so many struggle with money. They view it as an end rather than a means. Money itself is nothing but stored potential. Like a battery, it holds energy that can be converted to purpose. The tragedy is how many charge the battery their entire lives, but never connect it to anything meaningful. They die with charged batteries that powered nothing of consequence. This insight had transformed Marcus's approach to their inheritance. The fortune wasn't an achievement to be celebrated, but a resource to be directed, a responsibility whose true value lay not in its accumulation, but in its application toward purposes that created lasting benefit. 6 months ago, desperate and nearly homeless, Marcus had viewed money through the lens of scarcity, focused on immediate survival, unable to consider longer horizons. Now, with basic security established, he could adopt his grandfather's multi-generational perspective, making decisions not just for himself and Emma, but for the community they were part of and the future they were building toward. Spring arrived at the farmhouse with a burst of renewal that mirrored their own transformation. The heritage apple trees blossomed magnificently, their genetic diversity creating a progression of blooms that extended the season, each variety following its own ancient timetable rather than the uniform schedule of commercial orchards. The renovation was complete enough that they had hosted Easter dinner for several elderly neighbors who would have otherwise been alone for the holiday. The gathering had taken place in the restored dining room, sunlight streaming through repaired windows onto the original oak table that Jim the electrician had helped Marcus refinish. The meal had been simple but abundant, featuring preserves made from last fall's apples and vegetables from the garden they had re-established using heirloom seeds discovered in the barn. The conversation had flowed naturally between memories of the past and hopes for the future, the generations connected by shared experience of the cycles that governed rural life. As Marcus and Emma cleared the dishes afterward, she had made an observation that captured their journey perfectly. We were the ones who needed help when we came here, but now we're the ones who can help others. That's what Grandpa wanted, isn't it? I think that's exactly what he wanted, Marcus had agreed. He understood something important, that everyone needs help sometimes and everyone has something to offer others. The same person can be in both positions at different times. Now, standing in the orchard on a perfect May morning, watching Emma identify different varieties for her science project on biodiversity, Marcus felt a profound gratitude for the path that had led them here. What had seemed like failure, the loss of his teaching position, the depletion of their savings, The eviction notice that had forced their desperate move had actually been the gateway to something far more meaningful than mere continuation of the status quo. "Dad," Emma called, waving from beneath a particularly gnarled tree. "This one's flowering differently from all the others." Joining her, Marcus recognized the variety as Arkansas's Black, known for its unusually late bloom and distinctive dark fruit. "This one's special," he explained. "It develops differently from the others, takes longer to ripen, but the apples last all winter if stored properly. Farmers used to prize these because they provided fresh fruit when nothing else was available." "Like Grandpa's money," Emma observed, making the connection immediately. "It took longer to grow but lasted when it was really needed." Her insight never ceased to amaze him. Exactly right. Some things are valuable precisely because they don't yield immediate results. Their worth is in their durability, their capacity to provide when all other resources are exhausted. The parallel to their own situation wasn't lost on either of them. Jonathan Riley's patient investment over decades had created a resource that arrived precisely when his descendants faced their greatest need, not through luck, but through deliberate, farsighted preparation. As summer approached, bringing with it Marcus's return to teaching in the fall, he often reflected on the contrast between where they had been and where they now stood. The journey from desperate last resort to purposeful prosperity had transformed not just their circumstances but their understanding of wealth itself. True wealth, they had discovered, lay not in bank balances, but in balance itself between present needs and future possibilities, between individual security and community responsibility, between enjoying life's fruits and cultivating its roots. Jonathan Riley had embodied this balanced perspective, living modestly while building abundantly, focusing on substance rather than show, measuring success by continuation rather than consumption. In his final journal entry, written just weeks before moving to assisted living, Jonathan had summarized his life's philosophy in words that now guided his grandson's decisions. "At life's end, the only wealth that matters is what continues without you, the trees that will fruit for another generation, the community strengthened by quiet support, the family prepared not just financially, but philosophically for whatever challenges await. I've lived by a simple principle. True prosperity is measured not by what you have, but by what you enable. May whoever finds this inheritance understand that its value lies not in what it provides, but in what it makes possible." Standing on the farmhouse porch as another day ended, Marcus watched Emma collecting the last of the spring wildflowers that had established themselves along the restored stone pathway. The farmhouse stood solid behind them, the heritage orchard flourished before them, and the legacy of Jonathan Riley continued through them, not just in financial security, but in the principles that gave that security meaning and purpose. What had begun with his last dollars and desperate hope had blossomed into something his former self could never have imagined, not merely shelter but belonging, not merely subsistence but significance, not merely survival but a calling that connected past, present, and future in a chain of meaningful continuity. The broken farmhouse had not only been restored, it had restored them, reconnecting them to values that transcended financial circumstances and grounding them in a perspective where security enabled service rather than merely supporting consumption. In saving the farmhouse, they had discovered what Jonathan Riley had known all along, that true prosperity flows not from what you possess, but from what you cultivate. Not from what you keep, but from what you enable to grow. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.